Hello, Tina O here from Tina O Life. This is night 24 of 25 nights to close 50. Yes, 50 is the year. That's the year, which means I turned 50 this year. So if you're new to me and you haven't discovered my work before, I'm a story coach, a story listener, a story keeper. I collect the stories from which we come. I listen. I track stories, and I have this theory about the double-edged sword of stories. And one side of a story is our medicine, another side is our learning, or can be poison if we drink too much of it. It's kind of like, when you have 3 glasses of wine, you need to have some water because now the wine is just turned into poison for our body, like that. And on this night, the night before closing 50, which is tomorrow, I am sharing a piece that, like, an insight of this year. I'm just going to say that. I'm sharing insight from this year. That's what these last 25 nights have been about. And I pulled out this book for you, for me. This book, Women Who Run with the Wolves, has shaped me. You can see all the notes I have in it. And this book has become a guide, really, for me. And when I think of it as I'm having lots of this is hard moments tonight. I'm having like, are you going to do this right? Kind of moments. And if you've watched my previous videos, yeah, that's kind of a thing for her. But it hasn't been a thing until tonight. So I must be right on it. I guess the stakes are high because I know that tomorrow is the last one. I think I care a lot more than maybe I have. Not that I haven't cared before, but I'm really present with how much I care, that these 25 nights are of service to you because you're listening to me, and I decided to do this publicly. I think I'm a little bit, I'm just tracking now, so you know what's going on. I think I'm a little bit, just a little bit aware and maybe feeling sensitive and kind of exposed in this moment that, oh yeah, you did this and you're doing this and here it is. Okay. Well, now that that's done, now that I've named that, I'm going to share this book with you because this book has been, a guide for me. And I didn't know how much of a guide until this year. Clarissa Pinkola Estes, might be Este. Yeah, it's got an accent aigu on it. It says, Canadian Tina. This book was given to me by Rodney DeCrew in my, I don't know, was I 21? Was I 22? I don't know. And when I got that book, when I got the book, I didn't understand it. I loved it. But I was kind of bored by it. I loved it. But, I was like, oh, I got to think a lot. Or, oh, I would just read the myths. The layout of this book is, you don't even know this book, Myths and Stories of the Wild Woman Archetype. I'm not going to go into breaking down the book. You guys can find it. What I want to share is that what this book does, wow, this is really hard tonight. I'm finding this very challenging. Okay, so I'm not going to read the story, but there's 3 stories that really, really, really rock me in here. The one that is most present for me right now is Sealskin. Wow, Sealskin, Soulskin. There's a line that Dr. Martin Shaw says. If you don't know who Dr. Martin Shaw is, look him up. I found him on Mud and Antler Bone. I might put the link in here so you can find it. The first time I listened to that talk, it was like he was saying all the words in my head that I didn't have in my head yet. I was like, wherever this man does his work from is the internal realm of my brain. His internal, like, this is everything happens there. And he says this line in one of his videos recently. He says, when a woman is staring out the window and she turns to you and her eyes are nondescript, it's not that she's not here. It's not that she's, oh, this isn't what he said, but it's not that she's crazy. It's not that she's a witch. It's not that she's not listening to you. It's that she's actually remembering her water time, her seal time. Those are not his words. That is the story I've attached to it. But what caught me was, it was one line about when a woman looks at you and you can't see her, is because you actually see her. And she's gone back to her wild self. And the story in so sealskin, soulskin is about a man who finds these seals and steals one of the pelts of the seal. It's her and of a woman, and she lives with him for 7 years. They have a child, and inside her she remembers she has to go back because she's a seal. She has to go back to the water. And I'm not going to give you the whole story, but there's this water-like part of her, this wild part of her that is sensual and motherly and nurturing and water and ancient. And that story, I've read that story out loud probably 10 times because sounds like it sounds like a call in the water. You know how when you're underwater and you hear something, it's a totally different sound? That story calls to that part of me. And when the story's unpacked, there's a by Clarissa, because that's what she does. She takes these myths and she says, and this is how you relate to it. This is what's inside this myth. When she unpacks that story, it speaks to that moment of in my life. And certainly, I don't think I know a woman who doesn't understand this. And I don't think it's just women. I do think in our 2,000-year-old patriarchal structure, it might be a lot of women, most women. But as this patriarchal structure shifts, it's not just women, it's anyone who's been marginalized. And that moment when you realize I either one was never initiated into my wild self, or just as that initiation was starting to happen around, I don't know, 17 maybe, just as that initiation was starting to happen, I no longer owned it. And then it shows up again around childbearing years, meaning motherly years, not just physically childbearing, but motherly years, whether you give birth or not. And that wild woman arrives inside me. But because that initiation didn't go so well at whatever age, and I'm not talking about virginity, I'm talking about when that part wakes up, the wild part wakes up. But it's like a blade of grass. When I'm working with writers, Mary Beth and I call it, we don't, when we do writing retreats, we don't let people share too early because our work is like a little blade of grass just coming up out of the earth. And so if the initiation hasn't happened well, then when that wild woman shows up in these birthing times in our life, where, let's be real, that is wild. If the initiation didn't go well, then that doesn't necessarily complete either. And as I move into 51, this year has been all about the remembering and the wind in the trees, like a pulse in the water. It has been all about knowing that that wildness was never gone. It's a circle that is looking for its other end. So this book holds that story. Another story that's in this book that has shaped me, that I've also read at least 25 times, probably out loud, is Skeleton Woman. And Skeleton Woman is about a man who goes fishing. He pulls up a skeleton, and he freaks him out. So he goes really fast back to his tent, and it looks like this skeleton is dancing on the water. It's a skeleton of a woman. He's all tangled up in her. The skeleton comes into the tent, and this grief strikes over time. This grief of lots of things: loneliness, existential loneliness, and he cries. And in that tear strikes the bones, and then flesh grows. I have read that story more times than I can count, because it doesn't. Why? Because every step of that story is a step that I can track in my own life, in others around me, and the flesh of a tear. Again, back to water. Interesting. I hadn't thought about that. But anyway, the flesh of a tear, the flesh of water on bone, the flesh that appears, that grows, that through nourishment we come into being. There's so much there. And it's when Clarissa unpacks it, I talk to her like she's my sister. when Clarissa unpacks it, it's the life, death, life cycle, life, death, life, life, death, life, life, death, life. It has less to do with the relational quality and more about of the two of them, and everything to do with I live, I die, I live, I live, I die, I live. And in the work I do in story work, that's the ripples. When the stone of us, our story stone, the stone that we are, the divine narrative that we are, drops into the water. This one actually I love because it's got circles on it. The story of us ripples out. It ripples out. So between ripples is a life, death, life, life, death, life, ripple, 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 ripple. And it's the death part that our particular time that we live in, we hate it. We just don't do it. We don't do. Matter might die, like bodies might die. We might, we have rituals around all of that, around grieving, but not even grieving, just being sad. But we kind of understand it because we're dealing with matter. But we're more than just matter. And everything that happens here, when you and I are in a room together, the space between us is not matter. It's the space between us. And that dies too. Doesn't die like disappear. Dies like life, death, life, life, death, life. If I can breathe with you and you can breathe with me, we will have life, death, life. Yeah. I think 50 is a big life, death, life. In fact, I don't even know that I'm going to say death. I don't know. For me, I'll speak for me. Death happened in my 40s. It's like that decade was a decade of death. And 50 is opening as a decade of life. But I'm just a little baby out here. Like I'm just a little toddler. Okay, life, death, life. All right. The other story in Women Who Run with the Wolves is Bluebeard. The Bluebeard story. Yikes-a-rama. Again, I have read that story a zillion times. Mary Beth and I have unpacked it as a beautiful example of how to use myth in your writing, different stages of myth. But the big piece about Bluebeard that still walks with me, and I think this has everything to do with patriarchy. And I want to take gender out of patriarchy, by the way, because I know if dudes are watching this, you might be like, oh God, I'm really tired of this whole patriarchal conversation. I get it. Totally get it. I have 3 sons. And I'll never forget one of my sons coming home after their sex ed talk or whatever and saying, Mom, I don't get it. Like, why am I the bad guy? Why am I the bad guy? I haven't done anything wrong. I've done nothing wrong, and I'm already a perpetrator in the room. Oh, can we unpack that? He's already a perpetrator in the room. So I want to just hang out in patriarchy just for a sec, okay? I said to him, I get it. And I think the piece that you don't understand yet, and you will over time, is that you are born at a time, just as we all are, but we are all born at a time where our history has stories. And in the story from our history that matters, that's pretty top of, like in the cleanup pile right now, it's this patriarchal bullshit, rape culture, all of that stuff. So while you are not part of the problem, you are at a point in time where that problem is on the surface. And for you to pretend that's not happening is not going to be good. And I want you to understand what happened. And so then I talked him through, some of my own pieces of story around this. And I said, then this is your point of time that you have entered into. It's kind of like climate change. Whether we like it or not, we're here. We might get tired of it. We might want to say, that's not my story. I didn't do that. Okay, you didn't, but history has happened and history happened. So there's that. Okay, back up the train. Back to patriarchy. So, and I could also hear in him his own grief that he was born at this time. And then his own grief when he walked beside me when I went through my own bit of trauma, dating trauma in the last 2 years. And so while he is not the problem, he has come in at a time where that problem is very awake and ready and ripe to be healed. Which speaks to my book, actually, not to my book. I'll tell you more about that, which speaks to this Bluebeard story. The Bluebeard story goes into the dark man dream. And it wasn't until I read that term that I was like, oh my God, I'm not the only one who has the dark man dream. What? The dream like you're being chased, the dream that there's someone in the dark. And that's not a gender-based thing. And when I think about my son now, as I'm tracking, I'm like, I thought I was on a tangent. No, you weren't on a tangent. You're actually on it. His dark man dream, if you will, metaphorically, is his time in history. Our dark man dream globally right now is climate change. Crisis. Let's not call it climate change. It's a crisis, climate crisis. And so this particular story speaks to the evolution or not of moving from the naive woman, because it's women who run with the wolves, but I can make it for all of us, the naive person, and maturing into the informed person, which then becomes wisdom, which is not what that story is about yet. Wisdom doesn't happen yet. But moving from naive into informed, as truthful, as happening, as actually happening, with repercussions that will kill us or hurt us, that is exposure at its absolute finest. To move from naive to informed is exposing your grief, is exposing your outrage, exposing your shock, exposing the details you don't want to believe is true. In Bluebeard, it's the young thing who's like, oh, I just see how great he is. He's so great. He's not that bad. I know my instincts are bing, bing, ding, ding, ding. My wild woman instincts are going off, but I'm not. But that Bluebeard's not so bad. I see goodness in this person. Meanwhile, he's got a room with like dead women, a keyhole that bleeds, and there's so much symbolism in the Bluebeard story. And as I pull that forward into 50, what I see is that it's the emotional journey of it for me. I've had the awakenings. I've had the naive awakening. I've had the informed awakening. I'm even having wisdom awakenings. Awakenings are easy. Awakenings are like either a big old slap in the face or a big old soft little caress of the face, but it changes you either way. Awakenings are easy. The transition, the exposure of that awakening, not so easy. And if you listen to, I think it was night 22, where I talked about messy, messy is the state that happens walking into an awakening, walking out of an awakening. And so this book has shaped me. If I had to sum it up, I've just given you 3 of my favorite stories. And I think I even have a recording of me reading the Bluebeard story on YouTube. I'm pretty sure I do. If I had to sum it up, I would go back to the thing that was hard for me to say at the top of this, which is the acknowledgement of the seal skin, the exposure of remembering I have a seal skin, a wild woman archetype that shows up sometimes as a wolf, sometimes as a seal. In my own, she doesn't have an archetype, but my own, I can't remember which night it is where I talked about the 3 women. But for me, she's Lavender Woman. Yeah. She's the one who stands at the ocean collecting stones, collecting lavender, and she's a wolf and she's a seal. So as I move into 50, 51, I should say, as I close 50. Yeah, some days you'll meet the wolf, some days you'll meet the seal, and there's more. I don't know who yet. Because things always come in threes. There's a third woman emerging. I don't know what animal she is yet. I'm Tina O from Tina O Life. This is night 24 of 25. Thanks for listening. I just have another word in my head that's ringing, so I want to say it. I want to go back to patriarchy. I think this book reminds us that patriarchy is just a paradigm, just as the wild woman is also a paradigm. They are containers for the story of us to self-locate where we are and who we are in it. And they are paradigms. You are not a paradigm. I am not a paradigm. The paradigm is the construct in which the I of us live into it. Those are external narratives, and we have an internal narrative of our beingness. So as patriarchy, as our patriarchal structures come down, we're just switching. We're just switching paradigms, but we get to, I don't know. I was going to say we get to choose what it is. I don't believe that. I actually don't believe that at all. I believe that our awakeness, whatever that means. Oh, I hate that word, by the way, just because it usually connects to a hierarchical understanding of our, evolution. Anyway, but our exposure, our state of mess, of exposure, of awake, of willingness is what shapes the paradigm that we collectively are agreeing to. So, yeah. All right. Tina O from Tina O Life. Thanks for going on that last little exhale with me. Night 24, 25. Women Who Run with the Wolves. See you tomorrow on day 50, day 25, when I turn 51, last day of 50.